drop and give me 25. I'm the gunny.
It's time for the gunny.
The quarter deck. Lights. Get online right now. You got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, my bunch of knuckle-dragging, beer-drinking, hard-charging devil dogs. You're listening to The Quarter Deck. I am your host, Miguel, the Gunny Signs.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Quarter Deck with Miguel, the Gunny Signs. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and I hope you're enjoying it and spending it with your family. This week on Hero Highlights, we take a look at Staff Sergeant William James Bordelon, United States Marine Corps, a Marine from Texas that was awarded the Medal of Honor on 10 December of 1941. This guy did some amazing things while he was on active duty in the United States Marine Corps that eventually led to his death and the award of the Congressional Medal of Honor. In our reading of our book with the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, last week we read about how the division was now preparing the camps for the division to actually arrive to and where their permanent home was going to be once they got into country. I mean, wow, what a huge step in actually getting somewhere where the division can get to and has to prepare for the mission that was coming up ahead. This week, we take a look at the actual embarkation process. How the heck were they going to get the whole entire 1st Marine Division from the United States, from Camp Pendleton, California, and their augments from North Carolina that were going to be attached to them into country the fastest way possible? And we'll take a look at that this week because it's amazing, and it's something that I remember vividly in my head as the process that we had to go through in order to get from Pendleton to Kuwait and eventually heading into Iraq. The Quarter Deck. If you're just joining us, you're listening to The Quarter Deck with Miguel, the Gunny Signs, and I hope that everyone is having a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving day and enjoying it there with your family. As far as for me, we're going to have some family over today, have a nice turkey that we're going to be cooking in the oven. This year, we're only doing one. Normally, sometimes we always do a fried turkey and also a turkey in the oven. And let me tell you guys, my wife makes the most delicious stuffing that we cook inside of the turkey every Thanksgiving. I think if it was just me, I would just tell her, forget the turkey and let's just make pure stuffing and that it, and we'll call it a day. But I think I'm the one that actually eats the most of her stuffing that she makes every single year. To me, that is one of the things that I actually look forward to. But talking about Thanksgiving, one of the things that every year that I celebrate or that I look back to is November 22nd. And the reason I do that is because on November 22nd of 1995 is when I graduated from recruit training on board Parris Island, South Carolina. For the last time, I walked across the parade deck with my senior drill instructors, Senior Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant VRL, Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Watkins, Drill Instructor Sergeant Boggs, and Drill Instructor Sergeant Donnelly in Platoon 2045, part of Fox Company. We were now graduating and becoming basically trained Marines. It's been 27 years since that day. Wow. I can tell you guys that time sure does fly, because it seemed to me like it was just yesterday that I was graduating from recruit training, going to my MOS training school and going to the fleet to actually do my job in my first 4-year enlistment that I was going to do in the United States Marine Corps. So to me, that has a special time. Not only did we graduate from recruit training during that time, but we also celebrated our very first Marine Corps birthday there on the parade deck on 10 November of that year. We had the whole company of our recruits we were actually able to see exactly what that was actually all about. So ever since that day on 22 November of 1995, I have considered myself a United States Marine because I was afforded the opportunity to go down there to Parris Island, South Carolina, and earn that title of United States Marine that no one will ever take away for the rest of my life. I've had so many recruits that I've trained throughout the whole time that I was down there on board the depot as a drill instructor from 2004 to 2007. So many that is very rare that I have a memory or remember a certain face of a recruit that we had in our platoons. Now, of course, there are the ones that I remember because they were just a pain in the butt while we had them in the platoon, and they just simply stuck out the whole entire time that they were there. But that's a story for another day. We'll get into that later on when we start talking about some boot camp stories. And speaking of boot camp stories, I want to hear some of your guys's. Remember, you can go to our Facebook page, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs. The message board is open. You can ask questions. Leave some of your stories on there, and we'll be sure to go ahead and discuss them and talk about them here on our podcast. I look forward to hearing some of your guys' stories because I know that every Marine has their own crazy stories about what occurred during boot camp or anything like that you had it throughout your career. I don't know. I can tell you guys so many different kinds of stories that we had there in the barracks once we actually graduated and headed down there to our duty station, or even down in freaking MCT down there in Camp Lejeune in Camp Johnson in North Carolina when I headed there after graduating from boot camp. Now, the one thing for me and for all the recruits and Marines that graduated with me in our company during that time is that we were taking our 10-day boot leave back home during the Thanksgiving holiday. But after that, we had to head back to MCT. So here I graduated on the 22nd of November. So by the 2nd of December, I had to report to Camp Johnson in North Carolina. So I headed down there. So Christmas and New Year's, we ended up having to spend there because our class did not start for a little while after we all checked in. Now, since I did not have the opportunity to actually go on recruiter's assistance and stay down there a little longer at home, I had to report back there, and we basically just did a bunch of working parties waiting for our class to actually pick up. But the good thing is that I wasn't the only one that showed up during that time. Our class for MCT didn't start till after that time, and the School of Infantry, the infantry training school, they had actually already picked up because their school was 3 months long. Ours was only 30 days where they gave us the basics on infantry training and all the things that pertain to weapons handling, machine gun training. Since our MOS was going to be something completely different, we didn't have to go through all those 3 months of training that the infantry had to go to. But it was interesting while we were there because, all of us are young privates, PFCs, and we have our platoon sergeants that we had while we were there, sergeants, staff sergeants that we had in charge of us. And they were the ones that were responsible to actually train us and make sure that we had everything that we needed in order to graduate. It was pretty fun there because I actually was the scribe. They nominated me to be the scribe while I was there. So I was the one in charge of handling all the Firewatch rosters, kind of made sure that I got hooked up and really didn't have Firewatch as much. And also as well, some of the friends that I made there from recruit training, kind of hooked them up a little bit and not gave them as much watch, especially during the weekends. Since we did finally get Liberty Weekend to go out in town, back then we really had no idea where the heck we were going or what was out there in that area. There's nothing out there in town anyway, so there was nothing that we missed or anything like that. I mean, we looked for a Mexican restaurant because we felt like we wanted to have some Mexican food. And we found one, and it wasn't the greatest thing in the world, at least what I can remember. Because the only thing that I remember is that one of the Marines that we had, he was 21. So, of course, what are young Marines going to do? We're going to want to get some alcohol and drink some while we're out on our liberty. Well, it just so happened that I told this guy to buy me a bottle of Jose Cuervo. And like a dumb young Marine, I didn't just sip on it and stuff like that. I basically drank almost a whole entire bottle before we went and ate our Mexican food. So here I found myself in the bathroom, hugging the toilet, puking everything out that I had in my body. The thing about Marines is that we take care of each other no matter what. They took care of my bill. I didn't pay none of that. And they took me back to the barracks, made sure that I was laying down. And when I got there, one of the platoon sergeants was there, and he just basically laughed because he saw them dragging me and bringing me back to the barracks because I couldn't even walk or anything like that. But they put me to bed, made sure that I was good. And they were even so kind enough as to put my food right there in my wall locker. So when I woke up and I was hungry, I would have something to eat. So it's just, a real quick story about how Marines actually take care of each other. And speaking of taking care of each other, let's remember that this is the holiday season, and this is the time that a lot of veterans, service members, sometimes spend the time by themselves during this time, and they're not able to go home. It's a lonely time sometimes. I don't even remember how many times I spent Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's, so all the holidays away from family, alone, with nobody there. And during this time, it is normal to feel alone because you don't have anybody around you. All my veterans, all my Marines that are out there, the soldiers, whatever, but no matter what service or branch you served in, remember that there's many people that are out there to help you, to be with you during this holiday season. Just pick up the phone, send a message, call someone. It's very simple. I tell all my Marines, my phone number has never changed. They're more than welcome to give me a call, send me a text, let me know how they're doing. Or simply if they just want to talk to someone for a short period of time, my phone line is always open. No matter what time of day it is, if it's the middle of the night, I will pick up the phone and ensure that you have someone to talk to. Do not forget about the VA crisis line. It is available for you to be able to use 24 hours a day. All you simply have to do is dial 988 and then press 1, and it will connect you with a certified counselor from the VA for you to be able to talk to them and just let them know how you feel. And they'll sit there and they'll talk to you. They have support available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They also have a chat that you can use online for you to be able to communicate with them via chat if that's something you want to do. Because I don't know what it is with a lot of people nowadays. They don't want to talk to people on the phone. They'd rather just chat, send text messages, and so forth. And if you feel like texting them, just simply send a text to 838-255. Again, the Veterans Crisis Line, you dial 988, then press 1. That's 988, and then press 1. And if you feel like texting them, it's 838-255. So let's remember our veterans, our brothers, our sisters that are out there that may be having a hard time during this holiday season. Hit them up on the phone. Give them a phone call. Send them a text. Just check up on them to make sure they're doing okay. It does not hurt just to simply say, hey, how are you doing? Because sometimes that's all that an individual needs. So again, take care of each other. And let's remember what it is to have a brotherhood, a sisterhood that we're never going to lose, even once you get out of the service. The Quarterdeck is brought to you by Miguel Science Photography. From the beginning of your family to the first birthday and beyond. Whether it's a retirement or a Marine Corps ball, Miguel Science Photography is there to make memories that will last a lifetime. Miguel Science Photography is a certified veteran-owned business. Contact them at miguelsciencephotography.com.
What we're gonna do right here is go back. Way back into time.
Now that construction was underway and the division actually had somewhere to go to once they arrived into country, it was time to start taking a look at the embarkation, the deployment process, and how the heck were they going to offload everything once they got into country. The ability to get to the fight is a critical element of combat power, and the ability to get a Marine division across the globe and into a fight quickly is one of the nation's most remarkable capabilities. Critical to all was the adaptation of flexibility displayed by the MEF and its components in the reception, staging, onward movement, and integration of all RFF forces. Without the benefit of a mature theater logistical command and without sufficient transportation assets, the components, including the division with its forward CP, refocus efforts to bring these forces in. The forward CP established convoy security teams, airfield reception teams, surge drivers for all MPS assets, and much more in order to receive and stage personnel and equipment. The division's staff focused on sequencing the right forces with the right gear into theater, while the units of the division focused on packing, weighing, and marking their equipment. Conducting strategic mobility exercises in the fall of 2002 was a means to bring the two efforts together to assess how ready units were to respond to a deployment order. The Assistant Division Commander, ADC, Colonel John Kelly, and Deputy G3 Lieutenant Colonel Clark Lethan became intimately involved in the embarkation preparation of the division, lending focus on urgency to the process. Through the unit briefs, they injected discipline into the embarkation process and ensured unit plans reflected the nature of the fight the division was about to undertake. Light, lean, lethal, down to the pallet load. Units laid equipment out on parade decks in stick order, weighed loads, and measured vehicles. Because of the flexible nature of RFF deployment, the units had to do double duty to ensure their equipment would fit either on ship or aircraft, as the means of deployment was not certain. When DPROD 177A was released in January, deployment planning and preparation was validated as the division departed home stations for Kuwait. Time spent planning and inspecting unit line number, or ULNs, serials during previous months paid off in a speed and flexibility of deployment when the division deployed by RFF instead of the timeline of the TP-FDD. Deploying the force by a combination of military and civilian modes of transport proved challenging. In January, ships from all three EMPSRONs sortied to the CENTCON AOR to provide the first suites of Marines equipment. U.S. Navy amphibians, fast sea lift ships, or FSS, and contracted civilian carriers followed to prove additional capability. The majority of the division's Marines and sailors flew on commercial aircraft of the Civil Reserve Air Fleet, CRAFs, while high-value organic equipment flew on military transports. RCT-1 steamed out of San Diego Harbor aboard amphibious ships as part of the Amphibious Task Force West, ATF West. In early January, groups of Marines headed to the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and Kuwait to start the EMPSRON offload process. Offload Preparation Party, or OPP, Marines linked up with the EMPSRON ships in San Diego Garcia and Sigonella, Italy to check equipment. The insured gear was ready to drive down the ramp when the ships docked in Kuwait. Survey Liaison and Reconnaissance Party, SLRP Marines flew into Kuwait to ensure Ash Sharwaya Port and the Kuwait Naval Base, the two ports of debarkation, were ready to receive ships, and Kuwait City International Airport was ready to receive military aircraft. On 17 January, the advance party of the CSSG-11 arrived in Kuwait to support the large MPF offload. In total, 11 ships with over 5,000 pieces of rolling stock and 7,500 of containers were offloaded, augmented by convoys from CSSB-10, CSSC-115, and CSSC-117. The 11-ship offload was completed in 40 days, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Division logisticians worked hard to expedite the deployment. The Deputy G4 Lieutenant General Colonel Jeff Horrigan designed and stood up the division's operations center, the DOC, at Camp Pendleton. The DOC became the clearinghouse for force flow information and the link to ongoing operation in theater. At the unit level, Major Carl Small and the division embarkation team did yeoman's work, assisting deploying units in recording and reordering and reconfiguring their information. From data entry to assistance at the sea and aerial ports of embarkation, the SAPOE. Major Small's team maximized available lift to allow the division to close into theater as quickly as possible. At Kuwait City International Airport, Gunnery Sergeant Manuel Johnson became the single point of contact to receive division units and marry them up with transportation from movement to the LSAs Gunnery Sergeant Johnson was one of a number of unsung heroes who scrambled to move mountains of equipment and thousands of vehicles off ships and into the hands of warriors that needed them. The 7th Marine Regiment was the first division unit to deploy. As a primary maritime presentation force, the MPF GCE, they planned to link up with the gear being offloaded from the MPRONs. 7th Marine Division had conducted numerous exercises and inspections to be able to quickly leave 29 Palms, fly to an operation area, and marry up with assets from the FPF shipping. In the weeks following 9/11, 7th Marines had conducted a 2-ship MPF offload during exercise Bright Star in Egypt. During the second week of January, the advance party of 7th Marines arrived and prepared to offload equipment from the ships of MPRSONs 2 and 3, which had closed on Kuwait. The first 2 ships, motor vessels Hugh and Lopez, arrived on 15 January before the Survey, Liaison, and Reconnaissance Party SLRP had arrived. With typical can-do spirit, Colonel Tulin assigned Major Andrei Petrucci, the 7th Marines Planning Liaison Officer, to the division forward in Kuwait to the task. With a pickup team of only 15 Marines, Major Petrucci organized the offload and staging of RCT-7's equipment with a makeshift arrival and assembly operations element. There was nowhere near the full complement of drivers needed to offload the vehicles, either from the ships or from the flatbed trailers in which they were arrived at their desert staging areas. Marines from the division's forward CP responded to the call for drivers and were quickly bussed down to the port to assist. Cooks, bakers, and candlestick makers were all drafted into the service to drive Amtraks, MTVRs, Humvees, all over Kuwait. On 20 January, the draftee drivers were returned to Camp Commando when the remainder of the shore's party arrived. By 24 January, 7th Marines added equipment from the MV Anderson and U.S. naval ship Stockton. The 1st Main Body Battalions arrived by air on 24 January. The Marines of 3rd Battalion, 11th Marines, 1st Tank Battalion, 3rd LAR Battalion, 1st Combat Engineer Battalion, and 3rd AA Battalion, and combined with 7th Marines from the RCT-7 soon followed. By the time the MV Bolton and MV Bonneman completed offload on 27 January, the bulk of the combat power of RCT-7 was in theater. On 1 February, Colonel Hummer told the ADC that RCT-7 had closed the force. It took only 2 weeks to go from garrison locations to a combat-ready RCT in LSA-7. The deployment that started at a single RCT in Kuwait quickly grew to added a second RCT and eventually included the entire division. 5th Marine Regiment was the next to go. Without an MPF focus or daily operations, 5th Marines relied on intensive educational seminars and strong leadership to successfully get up to speed on MPF operations. The Marines of Grizzly had taken a crash course in MPF operations from their comrades in 7th Marines. This training included a visit to the Blunt Island Command, where the first-hand information of contents and offload procedures for specific ships were gained. Chief Warrant Officer Brian Spooner led the 75 Marines from the regimental OPP to Kuwait to accomplish the download of the Epsilons 1. Their first elements departed Camp San Mateo in late January and joined the division in Kuwait. MV Plus and MV Kokak brought the first loads of what would be over 17,000 items of equipment offloaded for RCT-5's use in combat. Working closely with the shore party, the OPP downloaded the MV Obregon and the United States Naval Station Martin ahead of schedule, finishing up with the MV Bobo. They received other units from Camp Pendleton, 29 Palms, Camp Lejeune, and eventually formed RCT-5. By 15 February, RCT-5 was staged with elements of 2nd Tank Battalion, 1st LAR Battalion, 1st CB, and 3rd AA Battalion. The RCT had gone from garrison to assembly areas in Kuwait in weeks, and with their brethren in RCT-1 and RCT-7 would go on to write Marine Corps history in Baghdad a few weeks later. RCT-1 prepared to load 7 amphibious ships that would take them halfway around the world as RCT-5 and RCT-7 prepared to fly and link up with the MPF. With the release of a naval message on 6 January, Amphibious Task Force ATF West was created. In addition to the equipment of RCT-1, 1st LAR Battalion loaded all but one company of its LAVs and equipment on the amphibious ships. 1st LAR received one company's worth of LAVs from Epsilon Shipping, but was required to ship the rest of the battalion from Camp Pendleton, California. Marines staged equipment at Naval Station San Diego and National City Commercial Port. Onload of the USS Bonhomme Richard, USS Boxer, USS Cleveland, and the USS Comstock began on 10 January. With the assistance of the ATF West Embark Officer, Chief Warrant Officer Mark Ivey, the Cleveland, Comstock were loaded in 2 days. Division Marine ship's crew and Navy staff began loading the next ship before the last was finished. The Pearl Harbor, Anchorage, and the Dubuque loaded simultaneously, all finishing at the same time as the Boxer and the Bonhomme Richard. ATF West pulled away from the pier on 17 January as families waved and news crews filmed. During the transit, the RCT-1 Marines continued their combat conditioning by conducting initiative training that optimized the available space on board ship. The RCT conducted daily communications exercises among the units on board the various ships of the ATF to improve the regiment's radio and data connectivity reliability. Several commanders' conferences were conducted to refine ashore training schedules, combat procedures, and imagine the leadership through the initial actions of the opening gambit. Reversing the training cycle, 1st Battalion 4th Marines, 1-4, conducted the majority of their live fire, weapons handling, NBC, and physical conditioning training at night. The Marines and sailors from Weapons Company 1-4 instructed the Marines from CSSC 111 on weapons handling, individual protective measures, and other essential combat skills. Their transit would take over a month and include major mechanical problems with the Bonhomme Richard that delayed its arrival. Commodore Rome and his sailors lived up to the great reputation they had with their Marine brothers. These hard-working, mission-oriented sailors got their ships to Kuwait despite many challenges. On 25 February, the first ships pulled pierside at the Kuwait naval base and began to offload. In 4 days, the offload was complete, and by 1 March, RCT-1 stood combat ready at LSA-1. 11th Marine Regiment and Headquarters Battalion faced unique challenges throughout the deployment. As the unit responsible for providing artillery support to the maneuver elements, 11th Marines had elements traveling by both air and amphibious shipping. It would marry up with the MPF equipment once there. Deployed by both air and sea, the regiment was equipped with a combination of FPF and organic equipment. In Kuwait, the regiment gained from 10th Marines a counter battery radar or CBR detachment, 2 Q-46A firefighter radars, a target processing center or TPC, and 23 Marines. The 2 cannon batteries, India 310 and Romeo 510. Additionally, it attached the 1st Field Artillery Detachment, the 1st FAD, from the U.S. Army 18th Airborne Corps in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 2 Q-37 radars, a TPC, and 24 soldiers. By 13 March, Colonel Marletto informed the CG that 11th Marines had their full complement of howitzers and counter-battery radars ready for the fight. For Headquarters Battalion, the challenge lay in maintaining sufficient staffs in CONUS and Kuwait to command and control units in both locations. As February drew to a close, Headquarters Battalion reorganized to provide truck detachments to each of the RCTs. Following this redirection, they were fully staffed for combat operations. The Solderman completed downloaded on 13 March and provided the remaining assets to divisions needed in the fight to Baghdad. It was the last of 4 FSS and 7 contracted commercial ships that enabled the force to close. In Kuwait, the RSOI tracking responsibilities fell to Corporal Justin Dublin, who kept the force staff informed about the progress of the TPFDD and arriving forces. His duties included identifying force flow, discrepancies, and communicating to the DOC at Camp Pendleton Corporal Dublin's additional duties included briefing the CG on the daily process of the RSO and I during staff meetings, as well as serving as the Forward CP's plan chief, considering the rank of individuals on parallel staffs with similar responsibilities. His weighty responsibilities were testament to the trust and confidence that the CG put in the young Marine non-commissioned officers who turned plans and ideas into action on the battlefield. Once, when the good corporal had missed a few staff meetings because of demanding duties, the CG asked where he had been. Without skipping a beat, Corporal Dublin answered, "Well, I've been too busy to brief you, General." He was, and the CG knew it. The division is in country. Everybody is almost there, and this is like night and day for me because it just seems like yesterday when they're talking about when Colonel Marletto, the regimental commander at the time that we had, when he told the CG that we, the 11th Marines, with the augmentation of the Army and the 10th Marines coming from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, we are ready for the fight. That seemed just like yesterday in the whole process and the way that we actually got there, the headaches, the heartaches that we felt traveling there. And when they were talking about we moved by ship and by air, we were lucky enough to actually be able to fly. But imagine this. We're taking one of those jumbo commercial airlines. And I don't remember if it was American Airlines or United Airlines who flew us out there. But it was a crew. The flight crew that we had was the same crew that we were going to have for the whole entire flight. And if anybody or any of you have actually flown from the United States internationally, you know exactly how long a flight can be and how uncomfortable it can be. But now imagine this. Imagine a fully packed flight of Marines with gear, flak jackets, Kevlar, SAPI weapons, and a carry-on bag that you had to carry with you, crammed into the seats. And there was 4 seats on each side of the plane, except for first class. First class had a little bit more room up front. But imagine yourself crammed in there. When you talk about a can of sardines, imagine that. That's what it seems like for us to actually get into country and actually land. But the crew was great. In today's flights, nowadays, you don't get any food, you don't get anything when you're flying. You're lucky if you even get a soda or peanuts, and they even charge you for that nowadays. Well, we were flying for so long that we actually had 3 or 4 meals that they fed us. Because I remember that we left there in California, and then we landed in Germany. Once we got to Germany, we were there for like an hour or two to allow the plane to refuel and restock on food and all that kind of stuff. And then we got back on the plane, and then we took off again. And then eventually we landed in the Kuwait International Airport, which is where they bussed us in the middle of the night once we left Camp Commando when we were there for a couple of days. Camp Matilda was now our home, the home of the 11th Marine Regiment. So next week, we're going to talk about the actual planning for fires. How was Colonel Marletto going to actually prepare the regiment to support the division, the RCT that we were going to be responsible for that general support that we were going to provide for them to ensure that they accomplished the mission? Hero highlight. Staff Sergeant William James Bordelon of San Antonio, Texas, was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for valorous and gallant conduct above and beyond the call of duty as a member of an assault engineer platoon of the 1st Battalion, 18th Marines, tactically attached to the 2nd Marines, 2nd Marine Division, in action against the Japanese-held atoll of Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands on 20 November of 1943. William James Bordelon was born on Christmas Day, 25 December 1920, in San Antonio, Texas. He attended the local schools and graduated from Central Catholic High School, where he had become a cadet officer in the Reserve Officer Training Corps. On 10 December 1941, he enlisted in the Marine Corps for a period of 4 years. Private Bordelon was sent to Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, California. In recruit training, he fired a score of 214 with the service rifle, Springfield, to become a Marine marksman. Completing his training with the 5th Recruit Battalion, he transferred to Casual Company for a brief period and then to Company D, 2nd Engineer Battalion, 2nd Marine Division, then stationed in San Diego. Promotions in the engineers came rapidly for him. Advanced to private first class by February of 1942. He was promoted to corporal less than 6 weeks later, on 14 March. His appointment to sergeant took effect on 10 July of the same year. Transferred to Company C, 18th Marines in September, Sergeant Bordelon moved over to Company L, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines the next month, and was back with Company C in November. It was 20 October 1942. His company embarked at San Diego and sailed into the Pacific. Arriving in Wellington, New Zealand on 9 November, the 2nd Division remained there for about 6 weeks before shoving off again. On 24 December 1942, he embarked on board the USS President Hayes, which took him to Guadalcanal. Sergeant Bordelon's organization was on the enemy-infested island from 4 January to 19 February of 1943, and then returned to New Zealand via the USS President Adams. The next few months were spent in reorganizing, recreation, and preparation of the next campaign. He was promoted to Staff Sergeant on 13 May 1943. He was transferred to Company A, 1st Battalion, 18th Marines on 10 October, and 1 week later again went aboard a ship. This time, it was the USS Zealand, and she didn't leave Wellington until 1 November, making one stop at Efate, New Hebrides, on the 7th and sailing again on the 18th. The Zealand arrived off Grem. Enemy held Tarawa on D-Day, 20 November of 1943. During the subsequent landing, Staff Sergeant Bordelon was one of the 4 men from his tractor to reach the beach alive. Staff Sergeant Bordelon and his buddy, Sergeant Eldon Beers, went over to the tractor side together and were immediately caught in a barbed wire entanglement. Extricating themselves under heavy fire, the 2 Marines and 2 others from their craft managed to hit the beach and secure a little protection behind a 4-foot-high seawall. In reaching the beach, the Marines lost all their equipment except a few small arms and 2 packages of dynamite. Quickly forming a dynamite into a demolition charge, Staff Sergeant Bordelon personally put 2 pillow boxes out of action, assaulting a 3rd enemy position. He was hit by an enemy machine gun fire just as one of his charges left his hand. The backlash from the charge also wounded Staff Sergeant Bordelon, and he had to be bandaged by 2 of his companions. The small band behind the seawall was still pinned to the sand by fire, which was coming from a machine gun nest 200 yards up the beach. Gathering up the last 2 demolition charges, Staff Sergeant Bordelon started to crawl towards the enemy gun pit. He succeeded in destroying the position, but in doing so was again shot through the left arm. He returned and asked his men to apply a tourniquet. Taking a rifle, Staff Sergeant Bordelon providing fire coverage for a group attempting to scale the wall. In the meantime, his companions had decided to try to rescue a group of wounded Marines who were floundering around in the water offshore. On their first move, another enemy machine gun pinned them down. Staff Sergeant Bordelon, seeing his companions wounded, started off in the search for corpsmen, but was unable to locate one. Instead, he stumbled on a rifle grenade and immediately returned to take action against enemy machine gunners who were holding up the rescued of the wounded. As he started his next single-handed attack, his attention was caught by a badly wounded Marine whom the Serb had thrown upon the beach. Immediately, going to the aid of the Marine, he was caught in the shoulder by a burst of enemy fire. Although he was suffering from multiple wounds, he lunged towards the enemy gun and, employing the rifle grenade, destroyed the nest before he fell dead from a final burst of enemy fire. The Marine hero was originally buried on Lone Palm Cemetery on Bedio Island, Tarawa Atoll. He later was moved and laid to rest in Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery, San Antonio, Texas. The Medal of Honor posthumously was awarded to Staff Sergeant Bordelon by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Was presented to his mother at a large, impressive ceremony at Alamo Stadium in San Antonio on 17 June 1944. That week was designated statewide Bordelon Week. Throughout Texas, by the state governor, the 17th was Bordelon Memorial Day. In San Antonio, by memorial proclamation, Major Donald M. Taft, officer in charge of the San Antonio Marine Recruiting Office, presented the first Medal of Honor to be awarded a Texan during World War II to the late Marine's mother. In addition to the Medal of Honor, Staff Sergeant Bordelon also was awarded posthumously the Purple Heart Presidential Unit Citation, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. The quarterdeck. I can remember when the Pacific came out, and I was wondering if they were going to be able to capture all these outrageous things and heroic events that a lot of these Marines completed while they were there. And let me tell you guys, I was not disappointed because they captured all of these things amazingly. Just like the story of Staff Sergeant William James Bordelon and what he did in order to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. The 1st Marine Division is finally heading into Kuwait. The wait was finally over. The orders were finally in to be able to get the Marines deployed and the embarkation process put into effect to actually get everybody into country. Next week, we're going to take a look at the fire planning that the commander of 11th Marines, Colonel Marletto, was going to be in charge of to providing the division's fire support coordination so that they would be able to support all the infantry units on the ground in order to ensure that their mission was going to be a success. Thank you everyone for joining me this week. And again, I hope that everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving or had a wonderful Thanksgiving if you're not listening to our podcast till a day after. Do not forget that you can send us a message on our Facebook page, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs. And I look forward to hearing your stories, your questions, your comments, so we can get some of those things put here on the air and start getting some of you guys scheduled for guests on our podcast so we can hear those stories live. Until next time, this is Miguel, the Gunny Signs, sounding Liberty Call.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.